Hey there, artists, musicians, and busy creative professionals. How would you like to outsource your nagging to-do list? You should call Vicky at My Virtual Gal, virtual assistants to handle those things that keep you from your craft. Booking appointments, managing emails, tallying numbers, or editing your business blog. My Virtual Gal can handle it all. Short-term or long, daily, weekly, or monthly. Check out myvirtualgal.com to book your free discovery call and explore the possibilities. You'll be amazed at how productive you'll feel with a right-hand gal. My Virtual Gal. Welcome to Blowing Smoke with Twisted Rico. I'm your host, Steve Ricardo, coming to you from New Alliance East in Somerville, Mass. Things are going to get heavy today, as we'll be joined in the studio by a repeat offender. Duncan Wilder Johnson is here. And we have Bob Mayo, bassist vocalist of the legendary Boston metal band Wargasm, which we'll be hearing and talking to shortly. But first, let's listen to something from the Wargasm album entitled Rumors of War, the complete demo anthology, 1986 to 1994. This tune is called I Breathe Fire.
I
Please welcome to the Blowing Smoke with Twisted Rico podcast from the great metal band Wargasm, Bob Mayo. How you doing, Bob?
I'm doing great, Steve. Thanks for having me on.
I know we tried to do this before and we couldn't get it together before, so I'm glad that we can do it now. And I brought Duncan Wilder Johnson in here today because we wanted to make the show as heavy as possible. And Duncan told me that you guys did the Lemmy Metal Fest together, right?
The Lemmy Fest, yeah. Go ahead, Bob.
2 years back? 2 years ago, right? 2 years ago.
Yeah, because we didn't have one last year because there was a global pandemic. I don't know if you heard about that, but yeah.
Unfortunately, we have.
It's coming back. We'll do Lemmy Fest again soon.
Yeah, so once we get going here, we'll let Duncan chime in, and I think he has a couple things he wants to talk to you about. But before we talk about Wargasm, I thought it would be fun to tell everyone how we first met, Bob, which is really interesting. I was working for labels, and I think it might go all the way back to when I was working for Enigma, and you were the buyer at the 8-store chain called Good Vibrations, which was located on the South Shore here in Massachusetts, and I would call you and hype you on records, which you in turn would buy from your distributor, whoever that may be. I don't know if it was Important, Gem, Caroline, but we used to have a really good working relationship. And then one day I heard you're in a band. Do you remember our phone calls back then, right?
I do. I absolutely do. Yeah. Yeah. That was it was a great job because I was exposed to how things work at the indie level back there with record labels and promo. It was a great education. I used to deal with all the labels that you just mentioned and all the distributors that you just mentioned. I was the indie buyer and the import buyer for Good Vibrations.
And you were good at your job, too, because I remember you always helped me out when I needed help. And it's kind of funny that we're going to talk about how your band didn't really get any help from the label that you were on, and because they weren't doing what I was doing, right? Basically, they weren't calling people and saying, hey, we got Wargasm.
No, you know what? We did all that ourselves, and we can get into that later, too. Yeah, we did that ourselves.
And, you can't trick somebody that knows how the game works. And you basically knew how the game worked with retail and everything. And so when it didn't happen, you were like, I've got your liner notes here, which are absolutely fabulous, which we'll get to in a couple of minutes. So let's start here. What was the Boston metal scene like around 1985, 86, when along with Rich and Barry Spielberg, you guys started Wargasm? What was the scene like as you guys were coming into the scene?
Well, when we started to actually play gigs and to get booked in Boston, the scene was very commercial and glam metal. There was really only one real metal band, and that was Steel Assassin. And they were we're from Stoughton on the South Shore, and those guys are all from the Brockton area. And they had demos out. They were playing big shows down here in theaters on the South Shore, and they were playing wherever there was to play as an opening act in the early 80s in Boston. And those guys, I guess if you haven't heard them, number one, you should. Number two, they sound like a cross sort of between Judas Priest and Iron Maiden, I guess you could say.
I do remember Steel Assassin. They were pretty popular around here. Even though I was in California, I did a lot of A&R when I worked for Enigma, so I was able to keep track of... then I went to Roadrunner, so keeping track of the regional metal bands was kind of important. So I do remember that band. So those guys, you saw them, and that made you guys feel like you should start something up?
Well, Rich and Barry were actually part of their quote-unquote road crew back then. They used to tech for them. And they were huge inspirations on the Spielberg. So that was the impetus on their end to start a band. But the scene in town, as far as metal goes, metal, it was just Steel Assassin and a bunch of, it was pre-hair, but it was really kind of hair metal-y, commercial metal, pop metal kind of stuff, real mainstream stuff. So when we started to play, and we were obviously started out as an opening band, we were playing with all these commercial bands, and it was pretty tough because anything but commercial. We were thrash, I guess you could say, safely say back then. And
yeah, you
there
were.
really wasn't much happening back then in 85 and 86. There wasn't really much, if any, thrash happening at that point. And when we came out, we were actually called Maniac back then. There were no bills for us to really fit well on at that point. It took another year for a real underground scene to start to develop in the city, for the nationals to start to come through at the club level. And that's when we really started to get on bills that we fit on and that really benefited us.
This is a good segue, because when I talked about Wargasm back on episode 53, when the pandemic was so hot, people weren't leaving their houses. Not that it's too much better. We documented the band's rise and how you guys were opening for all the big touring bands around that time. You guys opened for Slayer, Megadeth, Fate's Warning, Nuclear Assault, Anthrax. Those are just the ones I wrote down. What's your recollection of that period and playing those shows? Because you guys were getting on some really good bills.
That was an amazing time, because we got to make the leap from playing with real commercial bands that really didn't do anything for us. There were the cross section of the audiences were at that point probably 50% male, 50% female, and the guys were just at those shows to try to get laid, and the girls were at the shows because they thought the guys on stage were cute. And we had nothing to do with that scene at all. Absolutely nothing. And they wanted nothing to do with us either. So that was a tough year. But once we started to play with national acts, once that level of band started to come through Boston, that's when the underground scene really formed around that era, where it was not commercially based music at all. It was the tape trading underground. It was the WERS Nasty Habits.
Mike
listeners.
Jones, right? Mike Jones was a guy, yeah.
They all came out of the woodwork, and they kind of formed a scene, and we became a real big part of that scene because we got the exposure of playing with the Slayers and the Megadeths and all bands like that. So
what were the venues? What were the venues, by the way, that these shows were happening at?
A lot of them happened at the Channel. Slayer show and the Megadeth show were at the Channel. But we really made our name at the Kenmore Club in Kenmore Square, basically starting out downstairs at Celebrations. We played with, so many underground bands played down there on Metal Wednesdays. And then that's where we made the leap into headlining shows too, was downstairs at Celebrations.
Yeah, I remember. I'm sorry. I remember when I was living in California, and I would come out here, and I'd go to the Rat mostly, and I would see the people across. It was like two different worlds in Kenmore Square, which now there's no world, I don't think, in Kenmore Square as far as music goes. It's pretty much has died. Were those shows really packed shows with like those
Absolutely.
bands? Yeah?
Yeah, they definitely were, because in 86, that's when Metallica, Megadeth, Slayer, Anthrax all signed to major labels. So they were still touring clubs, but they were on the majors, and they had college radio completely dominated, and thrash was emerging as like the hot new metal sound, and the videos were on MTV, and it was the Slayer show was sold out. The Megadeth show, if it wasn't sold out, it was jam packed. Those were huge shows. People still talk about those shows today. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw all these bands that you guys opened for, but I didn't see any of them in Anthrax. I did, actually. But that was the John Bush era. That was later on that I saw them in Boston, because when I had moved back here, they came through, and I hung out with those guys. I was going to talk to you about your label experience, and I'm not going to read the liner notes again because I did that on a previous show. But you guys ended up getting a deal. Why don't you talk about how you got the deal first before we get into that?
Okay. We recorded our second demo. We had changed our name to Wargasm. And at the end of 86, we recorded our second demo tape called Satan Stole My Lunch Money. And we sent that to every I had access to all the indie labels, contact people, because I worked at Good Vibrations, and I had names and addresses, and we literally sent hundreds of that cassette to self-dubbed. Everybody dubbed their copies at home back then on 2 tape decks connected together, and we mailed them all out to every possible indie on the face of the earth. And we did get 5 or 6 different offers ultimately, and one of them coincidentally was Shatter Records, which Monty Connor worked for back in the day, and they made us an offer which we passed on because they were a startup and they didn't have a lot of money. The budgets they talked about were really kind of non-existent. And for people who don't know Monty, he went on to Roadrunner.
Yes,
to run
he did.
Roadrunner, and now he's the president of Nuclear Blast, the biggest metal label on the planet. So if that guy liked us, then that says a lot, I think. So the one we took, we went down to Lemoore in Brooklyn for a Megadeth show, and Rich brought a box of our demo tape, probably 25 copies, and he walked through the crowd and just handed them out to people.
That's cool.
There you go, free tape, free tape, free tape. And about a week later, we got a call from Profile Records. And, when we were talking about their offer, the president of Rock Hotel, which was an affiliate of Profile, and it was Chris Williamson's label. He was a major promoter in the city in New York. He said that he heard the tape in his office a lot because some of the people that worked in his office played the tape at work because they loved it. And he asked him where they got the tape, and he said, "Oh, this kid was handing them out at the Megadeth show last week." And so Chris thought, if the kids in my office who work here love this tape, I better give it a listen. So he listened to it, and he made us an offer. It turned out to be the best offer that we received, ironically, because it was probably, in the end, the worst move we could have made. We didn't know that Chris's agreement with Profile was due to expire and that he had planned to re-up with Profile. But the timing was really bad because Profile had just had a #1 record with Run DMC.
Yeah.
And I Billboard #1, and I think it was the Tougher Than Leather album. And the Profile's philosophy at the time was, we just had a #1 record with no radio, no video, no touring. We didn't have to spend a penny on this band, and we got a #1. So rap is our thing now, and we don't need these metal bands. We don't need Chris Williamson and his Rock Hotel label anymore. We're really not sure what to do with any of these bands. They keep asking us for tour support and promo, and we didn't have to do that for Run DMC, so why should we do it for these little unknown metal bands? So we basically ended up in a box under the bed, completely forgotten. The album came out almost 13 months later than it was originally scheduled to come out because they just could not be bothered. And Chris, the entire time, Chris Williamson was trying to make a deal with them or trying to find another label that he could hook up with. And it looked like maybe EMI was a possibility for a while, that he might have a deal with them. But then again, we kind of thought he was just telling us this stuff so we would just hang on and hang in there. Yeah, something's right around the corner. I'm talking to EMI, stuff like that. But in the end, it came out. Profile put it out, probably just to get it off their plate. They did 0 promo. There was 1 full-page magazine ad in Rip Magazine, and 1, and that was all we ever saw. They didn't do any radio promo at all. 0. And the record was getting reviewed really, really well, but they didn't care. The record was #4 on the CMJ College Music Journal radio charts under Anthrax, Metallica, Ozzy, Wargasm. For about 6 weeks.
I do remember that because I was at Giant Records at the time, and I had this band INC. They were my only metal band. They were a thrash band from Connecticut, and the rest were all punk bands. But they did really good on the college charts, and I do remember seeing Wargasm. It was around 87 we're talking, right? Basically,
yes.
87, 88, yeah. Yeah, you basically told the story in the kindest possible way that you could have told it on the reissue of Why Play Around. But the part that I was curious about is you asked them to drop you from the label, but that ended up taking a while too, didn't it?
A while, yeah. A while is an understatement. 5 years.
5 years?
5 years. Yep, 5 years. So we just getting back to the promo piece a little bit. Rich was the one person who sat down from 9 to 5 for a couple of weeks and called. He had a CMJ open in front of him, and he called every single metal show on college radio in the country and got to know all the DJs, and we made sure they had copies of the record, and he made friends with everybody and had good relationships with everyone he spoke to, did on-air interviews, and that is how the record got to number 4 on CMJ. It was added to every playlist across the country because Rich picked up the phone because Profile wouldn't. So we knew that A, they weren't going to do a thing, and B, if anything was going to happen with this record, it was going to be because of us. So they had no tour support, they had no budgets, they had nothing because Chris was basically unattached.
Who is the distributor?
I don't even know.
The reason I ask is because you were still at Good Vibrations at this time, right?
Yes.
Were you able to buy the record and put it in the good?
Yeah. When it finally was released by them, we got it, and I remember the day all three of us worked at Good Vibes my office was at the warehouse, and Rich and Barry both worked in the warehouse as well. And I remember the day it came in, they called us all down, and we opened the boxes and pulled them out, and it was really cool. And we, at that time, we had real high hopes for what was going to happen. And, little did we know, it was very much nothing because it was reviewed really well all over the world, but reviews don't get you on the road. And reviews don't get you momentum in your career so you can do a second and build on that, and then a third and build on that. None of that happened. So we decided we were going to wait the term of the contract for the second album out. And then when they eventually called us up and said, okay, your next record's due, you're under contract for album number 2, we were going to say no and go to court. But it turns out that they cared so little about us as a band, they never called us up and exercised their option. They just never did. So we got lawyers involved, and we started sending them certified mail and telling them they were in breach. And long story short, it took 5 years for us to get another deal, because while labels mostly from Europe were coming out of the woodwork saying, hey, if you guys are free, let's do it, let's sign you up. And we couldn't because we were still under contract for Profile. They wouldn't let us out of the contract, yet they wouldn't let us record a second record either. So we were kind of in limbo for pretty close to 5 years. We still got a couple of European tours during that period of time, which was great. We played on a tour with Biohazard of Europe in 1991. That was an amazing tour. And we also toured with, it was a death metal tour, which we didn't quite fit on. We headlined a lot of it, but we were also openers on a lot of it. It was kind of a regional thing where who was going to be the headliner was decided. But that was great too. And that was actually where Massacre Records in Germany made us an offer, which we couldn't accept because we were still signed to Profile. But man, I'm squeezing an awful lot into this answer.
It's a good answer, though.
So Bob, it's Duncan. I have a bunch of questions. So
okay, go.
The first thing. So you said that Steel Assassin was sort of like they were the token thrash band at the time, and they were the only thing that was around. Everything else was, a la Cinderella, Warrant, etc., etc. What was how did you meet the Spielbergs and say, like, maybe we should try and do something? And when you did that, were you kind of sitting there going like, well, I kind of think it's kind of like Slayer, like thrashy, like Exodus, like was that already kind of in your brain, or am I totally off?
Well, none of those bands existed when we formed. There was no
okay.
thrash. It was, God, we were all still in high school,
Okay.
and like 81, 82 when we all met, and we were all invited to the same party.
Oh.
I had never met Barry before, but I knew Rich from high school.
Okay.
And we were all invited to the same party, and it was kind of a jam party where some of the older kids that were in local area bands brought all their instruments and jammed. And if you knew how to play, you just got up and jammed with people. And I got up and jammed with Barry, who, again, I had never met him, but he knew all the same songs I knew. He knew Iron Maiden songs. He knew Saxon songs. He knew a lot of the new wave of British heavy metal songs. So we ended up playing together and bonding on that stuff, just me and him on guitar and drums. And, all the older kids didn't know any of that music, so they kind of wandered away, and it just became me and Barry jamming for like an hour. And at the end of that party, Rich asked me if I would join his band.
And what was
like
his band?
His band was called Voyager.
Okay.
He was a sophomore in high school, and Barry was 16. Barry had just turned 16, and I told him I found out that Barry and Rich were brothers, and I said the only way I'll join your band is if that drummer is in the band, because he's awesome, and I loved playing with him just there. So let's get him in it too. And Rich refused. He said, "No way. I'm not going to be in a band with my little brother. It ain't happening."
Huh.
But later on that night, they talked about it and changed their mind, and that's how the nucleus of Wargasm started. I joined in.
So the new wave of British heavy metal is the main influence at the time.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did Voyager kind of just morph into Maniac, or was it like Voyager's done, Maniac begins? How did that happen?
Voyager was done at that point, and Rich kind of threw in 100% with me and Barry, and there was a bass player at the time, Peter Schiffer.
Oh.
Who we were just playing in Rich and Barry's basement at that point, just playing covers of new wave British heavy metal kind of stuff, Priest and Maiden and Saxon and Raven and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Pete quit pretty early on, and I switched from guitar to bass.
Oh.
But we really became a fully functioning band when we tried out two vocalists, and neither one of them, it didn't feel right having a fourth person, because the connection between Rich, Barry, and I was so strong.
Mm-hmm.
It just felt weird having a fourth person once I switched to bass. So I volunteered to sing lead, and that is when we were able to get gigs. And Steel Assassin's manager was booking the Kenmore Club. He booked us to open for Metal Church on our very first show in Boston.
Wow!
So that's the
Nice.
first Maniac show is opening for Metal Church at the Kenmore Club.
Very first Maniac show was opening for Metal Church, and Metal Church canceled.
Oh
no shit!
Yeah, so we ended up expanding our set by a couple of covers, and we played as long as we could, and we were terrified. We thought the Metal Church fans were going to hate us. They were going to show up and be pissed off and throw shit at us, and it was really, really potential nightmare. But like I said, I think the Boston scene was kind of looking for a band like us at that time, and there really wasn't one there. So they really embraced us, and that show was amazing. Everybody responded positively, and I mean, we couldn't even get out of the room at the end of the night, because these kids were they want to know all about us. If we had shirts, if we had demos,
And did you have any stuff, any merch, any T-shirts, anything? A record?
Nothing.
Cassette? Nothing. Okay.
Nothing.
So how long are you guys Maniac before you change the name, and why do you change the name?
About a year. About
Okay.
a year. We changed it because Mike Jones left WARS, and he got a job at Combat Records as A&R for Combat.
Oh.
And he offered us a deal, but it was only an EP.
Okay.
So we didn't want to record any of our songs for an EP and then not be able to use them again for an album.
Okay.
So we turned that down. We wanted to keep all of our stuff for the debut album. We didn't want to do an EP. But one of the things he told us was, now that I'm in A&R, I can tell you there's 15 other Maniacs out here. You guys really should change your name. So
I'm glad you changed your name. By the way, Mike Jones, I knew Mike really, really well. He was very entrenched in the whole heavy metal scene. So that was a really good connection for you guys to have at that time. In hindsight, you probably look at this now and go, you probably should have taken that deal with Combat, I bet, right?
I don't think like that, to be honest with you. I know that some of the decisions we made turned out to be dead ends, but it's hard because our convictions at that time, I wouldn't change the fact that we stuck with our convictions. We had a lot of belief in the material that we were writing, and we didn't want to water down an album by pulling off some of this. If we're going to do an EP, we're going to pick the 2 or 3 strongest songs, right? So then we didn't want to have to re-record them or leave them off of our debut. That how would that be smart, taking your best songs and not putting them on your debut album? So that decision, I wouldn't have changed that decision. And the other thing that happened that was odd at the time was Metal Blade asked us to be on Metal Massacre Volume 8, I think it was, and they wanted a song. So the same thing happened. We turned it down because we didn't want to give them a song that we would then have to exclude from our first album. Now, 30 years later, do I look back at that and say, hey, maybe we should have done it differently?
Yeah.
Maybe. But our first album, Why Play Around, if I can say this myself, it's kind of considered an underground thrash classic.
Yes, it is.
I'd agree with that.
And if we had done both of those things differently, that would have been like 4 songs from that record would not be on that record. And then what would have happened? I don't know how strong that record would have been without those songs.
By the way, Nick Z, who you can't hear, just yelled in our headset, "It's a perfect record."
Thank you, Nick.
I have questions about the songwriting. How did that work? Was it just 3 dudes in a room and you kind of hash it out, or is it like one person came in with the riffs and then everybody else kind of put their 2 cents on it? Like what's the process? What was the process like?
It was 3 dudes in a room.
Yeah. Okay.
That was it. Everything was democratic. Had to be a 3-way consensus also. It wasn't, we didn't use anything that all 3 did okay.
Interesting.
And that made it harder on ourselves too, because we needed 3 yeses on everything.
So you guys didn't have any manager or anybody else around helping you. It was just basically just you 3 guys making all the decisions.
Once we started to record the album Why Play Around, we picked up Steel Assassin's manager as our own. But really, he was really limited into quote unquote management. He was a booking agent at the Kenmore Club, and he had connections that way. He was able to book us around New England and around the Northeast. But in terms of managing, we already got the deal. We had the record deal without a management. We had written all the music and were gigging as headliners in the city without management. So there really wasn't much that he was able to do. Once he came aboard, that's when Profile pretty much shut us down. So he couldn't do anything about that either.
So he had nothing to do with the deal at all. You guys got the deal on your own.
Exactly.
This record, you reissued it, Why Play Around, and the packaging is just fantastic. And I was talking to Nick about this before when I came in. The photo of you guys, it's like the perfect metal photo. I mean, it was like you guys had crafted a real nice image for yourselves at that time where you fit right in. I wish you could go back in time though and say yes to that Metal Blade compilation. I mean, that would have been like the one thing that I would wish happened differently. So your whole catalog is now been reissued, plus the demos record. And I know you want to promote your Bandcamp page because we were talking about that. Has there been a resurgence in the band's popularity since you put all this stuff up on Bandcamp?
Yeah, I think obviously the internet wasn't around in the 80s or the 90s, really. So when we broke up and each one of us moved on to different things, the band was pretty much just dead. And
why did you guys break up? Like was it just the turmoil of the industry crap, or were you guys not getting along, or what happened?
Well, we signed that deal with Massacre, which was fantastic, but basically it moved our focus to Europe, away from Boston and the U.S. and toward Europe. And the records came out over there, and they didn't come out over here. We did a video. The video didn't get played over here, but it was played a lot over there. We toured over there, and we didn't get a chance to tour over here. So our main focus shifted to Europe at that point from the second deal with Massacre onwards. And, you know, the thing is, Massacre treated us really well for the Ugly album. They treated us really well for the Fireball EP. And they gave us tour support. They did promo. They had us in every magazine overseas. It was like everything we wished had happened over here, but it was happening over there. So the thing is, when it came time to do our third full record, they had bad news for us. They had just licensed the catalog of a major band, and all of their budgets were moving over towards that band. And
do you want to say what that band was, or no?
I'd rather not, because they're good friends. Good friends of ours. But all of the money that was available to us that had been
went to your good friends. Oh, man.
Yeah, it's you know how this works.
Yeah, I do. You know, I got to tell you, I talk to a lot of people, and I hear a lot of stories about bands. You know, I joke about it sometimes because, you know, Bob, I've worked for labels for a long time, and I always say that the bands always blame the label, and every band got screwed by their label, blah, blah, blah. But in your case, I totally think you guys did get screwed, and I feel really bad about it because you missed, like, right, if everything would have been in place in 1987 for Wargasm, you guys would probably be a big band because you guys had a great sound, a great image.
Might still be playing.
Yeah, everything about the band was like fabulous, you know, but the time span, because of the record deal and you had to get out of it, you guys did get screwed, and I'm going to take your side on this one. And not that I haven't taken the side of other bands before, because I managed a band that got screwed by a label, so I know what it's like. But I mean, you don't seem like the kind of guy that wakes up every day feeling sorry for yourself and everything. You just seem like you're going to just keep it moving forward. And one of the things that you did was when you released the demos package. You know, because we just played I Breathe Fire a little while ago. I listened to that whole thing on Bandcamp, and that's the song that just came right out and just like, it's like Wasteland, you know, it's like, just slams you right in the face. So, it might not be too late, you know? I mean, do you guys ever think about maybe trying to do a show or anything?
No, we did a reunion show. 2004, we did a reunion show that was a benefit show for a nonprofit that's run by a good friend of ours. And that was great. It was amazing. We basically blew out downstairs at the Middle East. We recorded it and we videotaped it and put a CD, live DVD CD set out. I wouldn't, for two reasons, I wouldn't say that it would be wise for us to try to get back together and keep going. All three of our lives have completely moved on from that. And, you know, we've all got families and we've all got careers. The thing about Rich specifically is he lives in Manhattan now, and he's worked for Josh Groban on and off for maybe 10 years at this point. And he
got famous.
Well, yeah. And the thing is, if he's going to dedicate the time and the effort to really do this right, he's going to be walking away from that career and that paycheck. And the only way that I think anybody with half a brain would do that is if they're going to make it up on the other side, and I don't see that happening at all. So,
yeah, it's kind of
understandable.
It's similar to some other bands in Boston that has happened to. Like Jesse Perez from the Lemonheads became a director, and the dude from Stompbox. He's out in California.
Eric Thaler.
Yeah, not Eric, but the guitar player from that band.
Jeff Turlick.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Decon. I was thinking. By the way, speaking of Decon, Bob, didn't you like play with Decon for a little while?
Yeah, I was at the beginning of that band. It was John Swihart.
He's the one that's in California that's doing all these films and everything. So like you're like Rich, they went on to other careers. But what was tell us about the Decon thing, because I had Eric on and I'm curious to hear how that went for you.
Well, after we broke up, people started making inquiries about what we might want to do next. You want to jam, you want to join this band, you want to join that band. And I was working in Alston at the time, and John lived in Alston. So John came by and asked me, hey, we're putting something together, and do you want to be part of it? And I jumped at it because I know John from when he was in a band called Grip. And he's an amazing musician and a great guy. And obviously, though, everybody knew about Stompbox, and Eric Thaler was someone who I jumped at the chance to work with. And Rob Lohr was the guitar player, and he had been at a bunch of bands in the city before. And he worked at Mr. Music, and he's just a funny guy. And I really, really value the time that I spent with those guys. It was a lot of fun. I'm sorry to the drummer if he's listening to this. I don't recall his name, and he does. As far as I know, he didn't really have much of a history in the city, so I'm just not sure. I don't remember his name. I apologize.
I don't either, and I don't have it in front of me. Sorry. What happened?
The tragic thing about that band was we recorded at WERS as part of somebody's school project. We recorded like 3 or 4 songs, and the DAT that emerged from that session got lost.
Oh
man!
So nobody's ever heard that, and that really bugs me because the stuff that John wrote and the way that Eric put the vocals on top of it was really interesting and a lot of fun to play. And that's just tragic that tape has not survived. That would be awesome.
I saw it. I actually, that's how I got to know Eric. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. That's how I got to know Eric. He got in touch with me one day when I moved back to Boston, and he asked me if I could help him book shows, and I booked some shows for them, and I saw the band like 3 times. Oh, man, I guess this is post Bob Mayo, but they were still like unbelievable band, I mean, I never got to see Stompbox, but Eric Thaler, what a fantastic, lead singer and a lead, I had to ask you about that because I know that you were in the band for a short while. So when Duncan's here, and he told me about Lemmy Fest, and we mentioned it a little earlier. What was
Yeah, so I have 2 things that I want to say.
Is this about Lemmy Fest?
One is about Lemmy Fest, and one's about something else.
Okay.
But I gotta say, Bob, so I never got to see Wargasm. I didn't move to Boston until 1995. Yeah, to go to art school, but I remember seeing all the flyers and stuff in high school, and when you guys did the set of Tank songs at once for Lemmy Fest, there is this sort of magical thing that happens when you and Barry play, and I got to witness it. Mike Luch from Temporary Insanity played guitar on that, but a lot of people came out specifically just to see you guys play, and a lot of people were talking about it afterwards, about this sort of magical chemistry. Can you say anything about that, about playing with Barry on that one show?
Well, like it goes all the way back to that party where I first met Barry. I mean, sometimes you just meet somebody,
chemistry,
and musically you just kind of click, and we definitely clicked musically. We didn't even have to like verbally speak to each other. It's hard to explain unless you're a musician that has ever had that happen to them. But the pairing, the chemistry was just perfect. So that hasn't changed. I've played with Barry in a couple of other situations over the years, and many other situations over the years. But Lemmy Fest was the same thing. It's kind of a no-brainer. Like, if he and I are going to play something together, I already know it's worth doing. You know,
cool.
There's no mystery. Is it going to work? Is it not going to work? It's going to work. So that was a blast. And Mike Luke is someone, obviously, we've known since the 80s, since back in the club days. And Temporary Insanity was a fantastic band, too. And he's a great guitar player. He learned all the stuff really quickly. He had never heard of Tank before, ever. And over the course of about 6 weeks, he learned all the stuff. And the rehearsals went really smooth and really easy. It was just meant to be. And it was awesome. I had a blast rehearsing for it, and I had a blast doing the set. It was amazing, and I'm glad everybody liked it. It was awesome.
How did you, Duncan, did you ask them to do it?
I think Barry approached me, and I didn't know who Tank was, and so he showed me these articles and stuff and or videos or something, and Barry basically sold it to me, and I was like, I'll check with JR and Angel. They're the other two Lemmy Fest producer people, and they said that it was cool, and that's sort of how that happened. And I'm glad it did happen. So here's my other thing that I want to say. So my band Destruct-A-Thon in the 2000s, we did one like mini tour, like a 10-day East Coast thing, and we got to York, Pennsylvania, and this band that opened for us, I have to look up, I forget what their name is, but they played their whole set, and they're pretty good. And at the very end, the singer guy just goes, "So there's some band who came from Boston tonight, so we thought we would play this." And then they just launched into Revenge.
Wow.
And I was and Youngblood, the drummer, and I were like holy shit. And we're singing along, Nate Dave applaud, and so into it, and it was like this awesome moment, and I was like, oh, this is like a Wargasm moment without the guys in Wargasm even being here, and I just wanted to say that on the podcast.
Well, it's funny because a lot of people know about Wargasm because my good friend Robbie Tabachka, who was in the band Eviction that I actually signed to Metal Blade, they were like the big thrash band in Pittsburgh. Those guys love Wargasm.
Yeah.
Because remember I got in touch with you, Bob, a while ago asking about vinyl copies of your the original vinyl? He was the guy that said, "Can you get me some Wargasm?" And I forget, Malaya Rays. He was looking for all these like Boston vinyl.
Formicide, stuff like that. Yeah.
Because I think that people there weren't enough copies of the original.
Yeah.
How many copies of the original vinyl do you think were pressed on that? Maybe 1,000?
I have no idea. It was licensed in Europe too for a couple of different labels in Japan. So there are copies floating around like on eBay and Discogs and stuff like that from the different labels.
For like $100. Probably.
Yeah, I just sold a sealed copy of the Profile I play around for $55 on eBay. So they're going for a couple bucks. Yeah.
No wonder you couldn't sell me a copy. Now I know why. You sold it to someone else. Thanks a lot.
Do you guys own the masters to that stuff now?
Now they do. Yeah.
Yeah. Now
that you do.
Right? Well, it's not really that simple.
Of course not.
Of course, because we were ultimately signed to 3 different labels. So each record that came from each label has its own little story behind it. But basically, we've been able to re-release the rights have reverted back to us for everything except for the 3rd album,
which is Ugly, or that the second album?
No, it's called Suicide Notes. The way it was released, we were going to call it something different. It was going to have a different cover. the track sequence was different. But right when we finished recording it, that's when I quit. So the label, the Massacre guys were like, okay, if you guys aren't going to be around to promote this and you're not going to be able to tour behind it, then we're not going to put it out. So they sold it to another label.
Oh man,
called Transmission, which is a Dutch label, and they put it out. They changed the cover, they changed the title, and they changed the track sequence. They remastered it. They didn't like the master. So what eventually came out, it only came out in Europe and Japan, and it was a really very different album than the one we delivered to Massacre. So this is kind of interesting, I think. What I did with the reissue of that one, I only reissued the package. We put it in the original cover with the original title in a CD box with an insert and all that, and we put a blank CDR inside of it. We're selling it for $1. So if you pick up this package and you have the Transmission CD, just pop the disc out and put it into this package, and you've got the official Wargasm release. If you have an MP3 or a WAV or something that you've been listening to for years because you downloaded it online, burn it onto a disc and throw it in this package, and now you've got the original third Wargasm album. So that is close as we could come to reissuing that album. If we actually try to reissue it like we did everything else, we would get sued. So can't do it.
And how did the Demos record sort of come to be? That was like, I mean, I've been working on this for like 6 or 7 years to try to get the rights back for everything that we have and to put it out the right way, to really, because we're in control of it, we can control every single aspect of it, from the mastering to the font that we use for the liner notes, and everything is under our control now.
Finally.
Except for that one record. But the last thing to release would be the demos, because I want everything that we possibly have to be out. So that was the last batch of stuff to put out. So we gathered them all together and transferred them over to digital and put them out.
Well, thank you for
doing
awesome.
That. Yeah.
Thank you for doing that. And Bob, you know what? I appreciate you coming on the show and answering all our questions. And I admired the band so much because your story is really, it's kind of heartbreaking, but it's also, your attitude is refreshing. You don't come across as like really angry about it, and I think you understand that the music business definitely, it's shady, to say the very least.
That's an understatement.
And you ended up having to go through the shadiest parts of it all. And that's why I wanted to get you on the show and tell your story. And thank you very much, man, for coming on.
Well, thank you guys. I really appreciate all the kind words, and it's great to have an opportunity to talk about it. We made it through 10 years of garbage, and I'm proud of everything we did within that 10 years. And thank you for having the interest in talking about it and spreading the word. I appreciate that.
My pleasure. Our pleasure, totally, Bob. You take care of yourself, man. I'm sure we'll be talking to each other soon down the road.
All right, guys.
All right.
Take care.
Thanks, Bob. All right, that was fantastic. Really good. I'm glad you were here, Duncan, because you asked some really good questions, and I know that you love this band. I could tell by the vibe you were putting through.
Yeah, they're one of the quintessential Boston thrash bands. Just like Bob mentioned. Steel Assassin and Malaya Rage and all that stuff. And I'm unfortunately just a little bit too young to have seen that stuff, so I can only kind of sort of live vicariously, but I love hearing how bands get together and all the little sort of minutia of the magic moments. And like I said, when Bob and Barry played that Lemmy Fest thing, I went, yeah, when they play together, there is like this sort of magic chemistry that happens.
Just like the way he said it was the first time they played. I love when you said that, because he had said that the first time they're at this party, people went in the other room and they're like, we got to play together.
Yeah.
And then he had to convince the brothers to like both play.
I think that's
with
hilarious that they didn't want to play together at first.
But thank you very much for coming down, man. And, being on the show today. Yeah. Also, I want to thank Nick Z for the great engineering job as usual. And I'm asking you folks to please check out the Patreon page at patreon.com/Twisted Rico. If you want to support the podcast, we have a lot of people supporting it and I appreciate it. It helps pay the bills and we need it. And if you want to reach out to me, you can reach out to me at twistedrico@gmail.com, at Twisted Rico on Instagram. There's also a Blowing Smoke Instagram page at Blowing Smoke with TR. There's also a Facebook, Twitter, blah, blah, blah. We're everywhere. So till the next time we say goodbye, this is Blowing Smoke with Twisted Rico. I'm your host, Steve Ricardo. Keep the rock and roll alive. Number 83. All done.
What happened with We Love You, Busy Phillips?
Well, next week I have Sibylline coming on, and she looks like Busy Phillips. So it's going to be really interesting having her in the studio here with me. It's going to be like having Busy Phillips in the studio. And that's when I was going to bring Busy back. That's very attentive of you to notice that I left her out.
By the way, I bought the last copy of Why Play Around on vinyl on their Bandcamp.
You did?
Yeah, just before we started. I was like, oh, there's one copy left?
He's going to see that, and he's going to be like, wow, man.